Welcome to The Nose. Let me just begin with a couple of observations. First one is, we're going to be talking about horror movies today, sort of the Gen Z version of horror movies. But in the history of horror movies, the most dangerous thing in the world that you could do would be to buy a house. Whether it's Poltergeist or Amityville Horror or Let's Scare Jessica to Death. That house was in Old Saybrook. It's still there, I think. To The Conjuring, also very Connecticut. Buying a house opens you up to horror and bloodshed. Now, Gen Z and younger millennials, they love horror movies. 91% of the members of Gen Z report going to see horror movies. That is unusually high for a generational cohort. But the movies that they see typically do not involve buying houses because they can't, because the current median home age of a first-time home buyer, according to the National Association of Realtors, is 40. This is disturbing in its own right. And they also don't necessarily go to camps by lakes and stuff. They don't have to go anywhere because in Gen Z horror, typically the horror, the danger, the terror, the satanic presence, the supernatural entity is right there. It's where you live. You're already in a horror movie. It's where you live. It's where you go to work. It's the friends you do shots with and play trivia with. That's where it's all going to happen. Two movies in that genre have made incredible splashes this summer. Some of the things that were splashing were bodily fluids, but we'll get to that. Backrooms and Obsession, both big hits this summer. We're going to talk about both of those with some terrific Nose panelists. R.S. Benedict, writer and bureaucrat, whose fiction and nonfiction has been published in the New Haven Review, Fangoria, Current Affairs, and a bunch of other places, one of which I will mention in just a second. In fact, I'll mention it now, Type Bar Magazine. Shawn Murray, stand-up comedian, writer, and host of the Fantasy Filmball podcast, and the upcoming Not the Guys You Kill, our long-awaited Michael Clayton podcast. Mercy Quay, founder and president of The Narrative Project. We're going to begin with Backrooms. It's the feature directing debut of Kane Parsons, who at the time this movie went number one at the box office nationally, was 20 years old. Backrooms has grossed $387 million at the worldwide box office. I think that's more than, the Odyssey is going to catch up, but I don't think they're there yet. So before we even get to the panel, let's listen to a clip. You're going to hear two of the protagonists, Renata Reinsve as Mary, a psychotherapist, and Chiwetel Ejiofor as Clark. Clark is a frustrated would-be architect who's running a really crappy discount furniture store in which he is currently also living. Hence his need to visit a psychotherapist. Let's hear, he's also been kicked out of the house by his wife. Let's hear Clark kind of lay out his problems right now. A1, please.
Okay, so you go in, and at first it just looks like an office building, like a huge office building, and then but then you keep going, and then you realize that none of it makes any sense. It's like imagine describing a dog to someone who's never seen one before and then asking them to draw it. They might get some things right, but there's no way they get everything right. The devil's in the details. So from a distance, you look at it, you think you're seeing a dog, but then you look closer. Why are you looking at me like that?
I'm just trying to understand.
Oh. For a shrink, you got a terrible poker face.
What you're saying might sound fantastical, but not dangerous. Are there any people in these offices?
Not that I've seen. I hear there's footsteps and stuff gets moved around when I'm not looking. I know how this sounds, but you gotta understand, it's massive in there. Like New York's subway system, massive. For all I know, there's hundreds of people. I just haven't seen them.
All right, so RS, let's begin with the kind of history of this. This has an unusual history. It didn't start out as a movie. It was known about by a lot of people from the younger generations. How did they know about it? What was there before there was this?
Well, this started as a meme, or a form of meme that's sometimes called creepypasta on the internet. Someone on, I think, the 4chan forums posted a photo from a blog that I think was originally posted to that blog in 2003, and it showed this sort of dingy, weird-looking yellow room with a bunch of sort of foyers and openings to hallways, but like no windows, and it didn't go anywhere. And they posted a caption about how if you phase through reality, you end up in a place called the Backrooms, and there's something in there chasing you, and like this image and this caption became a really popular horror story that was shared around, kind of like a campfire story, and it inspired a lot of different like interpretations and adaptations. And then this kid, Kane Parsons, with a crummy laptop and a copy of Blender, created a series on YouTube about people exploring the back rooms, and it was kind of like a found footage style horror series, and it just got wildly popular. And he started doing this, I think, when he was 16, which is pretty amazing.
It is amazing. Let's talk about the movie itself. Mercy, we should say a little bit of something about the cast. The cast, for an unknown 20-year-old director, has some pretty fancy names on it, but it's also, as you pointed out, a small cast, as is the case with Obsession, the second movie we're going to talk about. They're both arguably kind of four-handers. Talk a little bit about what aesthetic or narrative effect that has, having a smaller group of actors.
It's sort of interesting because I think having a really small cast has historically handcuffed directors and even the storytelling. It makes the world that the story is in seem really small. You are forced to do a lot with a little, and the viewer tends to see that. But in both of these, Backrooms and Obsession, Obsession more so, but in Backrooms also, you don't feel the impact of a small cast. And 100%, I think that the director for his debut is getting some names that punches well above his pay grade. And frankly, that also shines through in the revenue generated from this piece. I think, and I was practicing his name. I every time I see this actor, I practice his name just for shiggles. Chidoe Ejiofor, I'm pretty sure. As far as a heavy hitter,
that's close.
That approximates it.
It's Chiwetel Ejiofor.
Yeah. Chiwetel Ejiofor. Yeah. So I think he as an actor was probably one of, he goes deep method. We love to see him in these pieces as someone who's going to take up a screen with just his face for large stretches of the film. I think this was an excellent get and, very impressive for a director out of the gate. Backrooms for me, the isolation is needed, and you don't need a large cast in order to sell that as an idea. The isolation is needed. He goes into the recesses of his brain, and that's a lonely place to be. So I think a small cast does exactly that.
Yeah, I think, and Shawn, another thing that cast does, and I think it's sort of part of what Mercy is talking about, is it makes you feel as though these people are coping with something that typically, I would have probably called the EPA and several different law enforcement agencies. And at a certain point, you'd like to bring some people with badges in there and some equipment to deal with all this. But some of what makes this scary is that the people dealing with it are not competent to deal with it. I guess maybe, Shawn, I'd begin by asking you, how did this movie work for you? Scary, fun? How did you experience it?
I would say 75% of the movie, I thought it was one of the best things I've seen in a long time. And it's mainly just because of how well I think they did the actual back rooms. Like the production design in that space is so amazing to me. I thought it was like really well done, and specifically for this kid to be 20 years old, to have, even if obviously he's not the production designer, but like to be directing something that's that well done was amazing. And then the end of the movie just doesn't work for me. Like I just stopped caring about what's happening. But pretty much up until the point where it becomes the therapist's movie.
Yeah.
I thought it was incredible. I thought it was really well done. I could, maybe it's because I'm younger than you and I don't have trust in our government organizations, but I don't think I would have called the EPA or anything either. I think I would have been in there trying to figure out what was happening. Like, I don't know. Backrooms as a concept is so. I think that's why it ended up becoming a movie and was such a phenomenon online, because it is such a fascinating concept that I could see. Maybe I'm not as insane as Clark, but I could see myself getting drawn in to that space.
I think it's also interesting because, I'm a millennial, and as a peak millennial, there's something about the Backrooms set design that reminds me of the Windows, probably like 95 Maze screensaver. Does anyone know what I'm talking about? There's like this screensaver from Windows 90. Right, exactly. Okay, so there's a screensaver from Windows 95. And if you just Googled Windows Maze screensaver, this is, for me, the I don't know, recurring nightmare that I had after watching Backrooms. Like, I've been here before. Something deep in my millennial psyche has been in this back room before. And I don't know, maybe that's relatable, or maybe it's calling upon the sort of, dream of the 90s in a horrific way for some of us.
Yeah, I mean, I wonder whether that Windows screensaver owns something to Escher as well, because there's that sort of absence of right angles that you start to see in the back rooms. And so, RS, I have sort of a combination question here. One of them is, a lot of us are going to see the movie without having seen the YouTube stuff or whatever this sort of, early version of it was, or early iteration of some of these ideas. And I'm wondering if that affects how people experience it. And to get specific, I was talking to a woman today who saw it with another woman her age and their adolescent children. And the older women, the grown-up women, not older, the grown-up women came out and said, wow, that was kind of an interesting psychological thriller and a psychological statement. And the young people said, it wasn't about psychology at all. What are you talking about? You didn't see the earlier stuff. You don't get it. I would have guessed also that it was very psychological in nature, but maybe you can comment on the big whole mess of spaghetti of creepypasta I just handed you, RS.
Yeah. The feature film does the thing that feature horror, prestige horror always does, which makes it about trauma, and we have to talk about trauma. But the shorts focus a little bit more on it being corporate satire. In the shorts, the company that makes it, Async, is trying to sell it and market it as like a commercial storage space, which I love because it's so American, creating this incredible, dangerous technology that defies the laws of nature, and then using it for just the dumbest, most boring financial purpose possible. But I feel like a big part of why this particular movie or this particular image feels so familiar, why we all look at that and feel like, I've been there. It's because we are kind of there. Like, I consider it a kind of almost North American late capitalist Gothic, in that the Gothic is always about these rotting castles, right? But for us today, the rotting castle is like a dead mall.
Yeah, yeah. And yeah, Mercy, I think that's very true. And that there's this kind of quality, this sort of nothing works. We should say, if we haven't said it before, this is actually set in 1990, but it feels very 2026 in a lot of ways. There's this kind of sense that nothing works. And nothing has really worked for any of these characters. Ejiofor's character, his marriage doesn't work, his job doesn't work. He wishes he were an architect. It seems unlikely that he ever would have been one based on how he presents himself. Renata Reinsve's character, Mary, is a psychotherapist. She has these kind of lame-looking self-help video-y things that she's trying to market, but you really don't get the feeling that those are flying off the shelves or out of the warehouse or out of the back rooms or wherever they are. And then this look, to steal RS's terms, late-stage capitalism of this horrible furniture store and its pirate Ottoman theme. Just the whole thing looks like this is something that doesn't work. And I'm wondering whether for young millennials and for Gen Z, that's a very powerful commentary, that they've been handed a world that doesn't work.
Yes, extremely. Oh, my gosh. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think, and to the earlier points of the adult women with their kids saying that it's not a psychological thriller, I think that different generations are going to take different things and themes away from this movie. For me, it very clearly, but I said the intersection of this a little bit, but for me, it very clearly is a psychological thriller, and it's pulling forward some of the ideas of like memory reconstruction and the misinformation effect when it comes to like what physically, when you remember something, you are changing the memory. But I think Gen Z's takeaway from this film is like, there's no hope, right? Like, try as you must, but there's no hope, and ultimately you will end up, selling your soul to the capitalist machine. I think those are those are two valid takeaways, and they're generational takeaways. I'll also say, just as a small thing, I'd feel remiss if I didn't say it. I think Ottoman Empire would have been a better name for the furniture store, but I'm just going to name that.
That will hang on to it if nobody's used it yet.
Yeah. Although maybe that's my retirement.
A store that just sells ottomans. I'm not really sure if that's going to work, but and Shawn, just to get back to what you were talking about before, there are two younger characters played by Finn Bennett and Lukita Maxwell. The Finn Bennett character in particular goes in there with great gusto to an environment that has already really identified itself as dangerous and is getting more and more dangerous the more time he spends in there. The Lukita Maxwell character is a little bit more skeptical, but it's almost as though it's kind of like what you were saying. Why wouldn't I go in there? Things are so great out here that I wouldn't go in there and try to figure things out. I'm probably, a much more, sort of personally conservative boomer who's thinking, I'm not going to risk myself going in there. Maybe that's one of the generational disconnects, Shawn, that we're talking about here.
Yeah, it's like, even for Clark, who's older than the other two younger characters, is like, I live in a furniture store. You know what I mean? Like, what am I protecting myself from? Literally, he's gone in the back rooms for years and nobody cares. There's no outpouring of, we got to find this guy. It's just a guy who's gone. So he doesn't really have anything to, he's got nothing to lose, like literally nothing to lose. He doesn't have a home. You know what I mean? He lives on the mattress on the floor of the store that he works at. I don't know. When I tell you, I was in love with this movie for like most of it, because I think it has threads that it doesn't even follow up on that I feel like it really could have. Like, for example, the main, I guess, antagonist of the movie is the weird, sort of misshapen Captain Clark figure that is sort of the representation of him in the pirate outfit. But like, I feel like he should have been that, because I feel like that would have been an interesting commentary on the fact that, like, over time, the only people who would remember him would be people who watched him on those commercials. Basically his whole being just becomes a weird, distorted version of Captain Clark, the pirate furniture seller. But he is facing off against him, and I don't know, it's weird. Like, I feel like it has the problem with a lot of these things that get adapted for something, especially something from like a 4chan thread or whatever, is that it's just a kind of interesting setting, and then trying to apply a story on it without actually having a grasp of what you want that story to be ends up where it's like, yeah, okay, it's about trauma. And it's like, okay, but can you go a little deeper about what about it is traumatic? And then it's like, you kind of lose the thread.
I'm not sure that what's on the screen precludes the interpretation you just offered anyway, that he is.
I'm there too.
Yeah. Say more.
Well, I think that, most of this film it just all feels symbolic. I don't think it's a straight read at all. I even think that, like, to RS's earlier points about, and yours about, right, like late stage capitalism, the way we sell our labor, the way that he turns into, the what was it, Captain Ottoman? I forget what it was. Well, the way he turns into that feels like it is in this weird way, in conversation with Karl Marx. Give me a second, I'm gonna get there, right? Like, Karl Marx's commentary on how capitalism alienates human beings from their true nature and their utter souls, right? It's like these people become irrecognizable to even themselves. And I think if you're watching this film as like a straight watch and trying to get something as a straight read in that way, I think you're missing some of it. It all feels like innuendo and suggestion and symbolism. I think, Shawn, even to your point about like there are all these storylines that don't close. Frankly, the back room is a storyline that doesn't, right? The architecture of it. There's these doors that lead to nowhere, right? These steps that cap out. I think you see that symbolism built in throughout not just the themes, but the actual storytelling and the set design as well.
Yeah. I don't disagree with that. Okay.
No, go ahead.
See, I don't disagree with that, but I always hate when that's the thing. Was like, well, the point is the backroom doesn't end. So it's like, it's a story. It's like, I don't know. if that works for other people, sure. But like, I feel like the point of a story, like, it has to be satisfying in the container of a story, which for me, it wasn't. Even though I get the whole, like, well, if the back room doesn't end, then maybe the story does, and it's incomplete. It's like it feels convenient to be like, hey, I'm a writer. And I'm like, well, the reason I didn't finish this story is because did anyone ever finish the back rooms? Am I right?
Your explainer guy is getting drunker the more you impersonate him. But and Mercy, I want to point out Captain Autumn is actually the spokesmodel for your store.
Got it.
Yeah.
I forget.
And in your store, you're also going to form something called the Ottoman Society, where they go out and look at other ottomans up in trees and stuff like that. One thing that we need to talk about, RS. It seemed to me watching this, and I think I saw it also in the piece that you wrote about this, called Hostile Architecture, Late Capitalism, and Backrooms, if I didn't say it before, in Type Bar Magazine. I thought this person has some familiarity with David Lynch, and David Lynch kind of, maybe not the first person, but one of the great expositor of this idea that you can take a fairly boring looking, situation and just make it seem incredibly menacing. And so everything that seems kind of humdrum is potentially really incredibly dangerous. But the other thing that Lynch is good at, and this is something that you wrote about, are liminal spaces. The idea that you go into a place and you're not there. You've got 1 foot where you left and 1 foot where you're going. But say a little bit more about how you see liminality in Backrooms.
Well, the Backrooms, as sort of a meme, as sort of a what they call a creepypasta, which I know is kind of a goofy term, is part of this trend that was really big like 5-ish years ago on the internet called liminal horror. And liminality means being in an in-between place, or an in between two states. So like twilight is a liminal time between daylight and nighttime, and like a hallway or a doorway is a liminal space. And there's a long history of superstitions and rituals associated with these spaces. But you're not supposed to linger there. Like, it exists to push you through somewhere else. And my take is that we've designed North American society, most of our spaces, like culturally, psychologically, physically, to be liminal, in that you're supposed to spend some money and get out. Like, you're not supposed to kind of hang out there. Even your home, you're not, like you mentioned earlier, the average age of first home buying is 40. So if you're a youngish person, you're moving from place to place over and over and over again, not putting up roots. So I think this liminal horror trend is part of the psychological misery of never feeling like you're settled, of always feeling like you're supposed to just spend some money and get out.
All right, we have to stop there. The movie is Backrooms. You can now stream it. You might be able to find it in a movie theater if that's your preference. We're going to take a little break. Shawn Murray is going to go buy a large number of baguettes, as many as he can fit under his arm. Carolyn Paine is going to come and join us, and we will be talking about Obsession.
Brain, eyes, and other structures of them. Soon and vigorously beating heart is pumping blood throughout the complex embryo, which is rapidly developing into a mature organism. The effort your level is unpaid. The cells move both sides of the nephron on a vacant area called Benedict Street. Forever.
I would also say that taking that song and repurposing it in a very sinister, horror-ridden context is also very David Lynch. All right, before I introduce the panel, I just want to say something, all right? I just want to say that everyone listening to this show will die never feeling the strength of connection that I have with my nose panel. Just needed to get that out. But we are going to talk about the movie Obsession. R.S. Benedict is a writer and bureaucrat whose fiction and nonfiction have been published in the New Haven Review, Fangoria, Current Affairs, and a bunch of other places. Carolyn Paine, actress, comedian, founder and director of CONNetic Dance, and the creative producer and choreographer for the Bushnell's Digital Institute, and a lot of other things besides. Mercy Quay, founder and president of the Narrative Project. We're going to talk about Obsession. This is a movie with a little bit more of a no-name cast, unless you think Andy Richter is a name. He's not really in the movie very much anyway. Directed by Curry Barker. This is a second feature film written, directed by Curry Barker. Perhaps a number that will get your attention. It certainly got Hollywood's attention. It was made for $750,000, and it has grossed $443 million at the worldwide box office. It is about a kind of feckless young man who wishes that his high school sweetheart, with whom he is still involved in a platonic way and in a workplace way, he wishes that young woman would fall in love with him, and he gets what appears to be a kind of meaningless piece of junk shop stuff. One of those things like in the movie Big or something that seems like it's just fun to play around with, but maybe isn't really. Let's hear Michael Johnston as Bear. Bear is the protagonist. His real name is Baron. Everyone calls him Bear. Chloe Breen as Ruthie, and Cooper Tomlinson as Ian. You're going to hear them talk about Nikki. Nikki is the woman, the object of desire for Bear. Here we go.
I think about you all the time, Nikki. And I try not to. You're in every song I listen to. You were the only person that was nice to me when I moved here. And then after Nana passed, you were the one that called. Even when I didn't have anything to say and we just sat there. So I keep telling myself, don't tell her she's too good. You'll lose her. But maybe you should know that I would choose you over everything.
Oh, that's
No,
everything.
stop. Okay, that was cringy.
Oh my God, I knew it.
Way too much.
I'm so
I
sorry.
thought that was sweet.
I thought it was gross. Okay,
should've-
this time I want
No,
you...
I'm not doing it again, dude. That was so embarrassing.
Yeah, that would freak it. That freaked me out. Okay, Nikki would
You
vomit.
told me to pour my heart out. Do you know how vulnerable I just got?
I underestimated you.
So now I can tell you that the person that he's talking to is not the object of his desire. He's practicing. He's practicing with a waitress named Ruthie. And when they say that Nikki would vomit, that turns out to be somewhat predictive. But so Carolyn Paine, welcome to the nose today. Since you just recently joined us, tell us about your experience with Obsession, the movie. I mean,
Yeah. So this, first of all, I love horror movies, so I was excited to see this. It starts and like you said, like kind of like with Big, like at first you're like sort of in this 80s rom-com vibe, and then all of a sudden there's a dead cat. And that really that just hits. It hits hard and you're like, oh, things are going to get dark really fast here. Overall, I enjoyed this ride. I think there's a lot to unpack. I think the sense of this wanting love, that's unrequited love, then turning into this demonic obsession and this dark-sided view of getting that relationship of your dreams, or getting anything that you want when it actually happens and when it's not not the way that it should be. So, I mean, I really thought this was incredible. And also I really want to have a chance to talk about the pipeline from YouTube creator to Hollywood blockbuster with this huge revenue. As a creator, that's fascinating to me. I want him to teach that as a graduate level course that I would 100% attend.
yeah, I think any course that you that you offer that explains how to take $750,000 worth of production and turn it into $443 million worth of worldwide box office would be a very well attended course. RS, as something of a horror expert, I think you ought to explain the genre or the trope of the monkey's paw, of which this is a part.
So monkey's paw stories, they're a really popular trope in horror fiction, horror movies going back a very long time. And the premise is basically be careful what you wish for. Our protagonist gets some sort of object that grants a wish, but at a terrible, 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 terrible cost. And in this case, the one wish willow is that object.
So let's, Mercy, talk a little bit about the dynamics of this movie. The movie is experienced through the eyes and the person of Bear, who I almost wonder whether this guy's slightly miscast, because in some ways he's a little bit too handsome to be as feckless and kind of useless as he appears to be most of the time. But it's presented to us as we're watching as his problem. He did this thing. He wished for this thing. It came true way too much, way too extra. And now he's got to find some way to put the puppet back in the jack in the box or the toothpaste back in the tube or whatever you want to say. Although there's an entirely different way of looking at it, one that you have emphasized on social media. I've seen other people, including my friend Olivia, do this too, where it's really Nikki's story, the story of a woman who is essentially transformed into or possessed by another version of herself. But say more about that.
Yeah, I mean, it is Nikki's story, but it's Nikki's story through the male gaze, which again is this like, I mean, I don't know, maybe Shawn would hate this, but this like loop, this loop of metaphor in this. I think that the story in itself is about women being captive to the male gaze and male desire. The obsession, I've said this over and over, isn't Nikki's, and we're not watching, right, the effects of her obsession. We're watching the effects of Bear's obsession. And, you know, I guess the point of held captive to the male desire that runs through throughout. I think something that Aris, I'd love to hear you say a little bit more about this, because naturally monkey's paw is in this, but I've talked a lot about how, right, like the most dangerous character in any film, in any horror specifically, is the coward. Because time and time again, the coward is going to, and I think this, whether it's TV or film, I think the coward is going to protect themselves and sacrifice anyone else so that they're safe. I'm a huge fan of The Walking Dead. Eugene is a huge coward, and he gets so many people killed and endangers so many people, to the point that, you know, Bear might have been miscast because he's kind of, you know, handsome. He's maybe too handsome to be as feckless as he is. I think that is, even if not intentional, it does a really great job at creating a character who should be relatable and identifiable to a lot of male viewers who see themselves as otherwise nice guys, otherwise attractive people, but right, are kind of speckless and right, you know, act out on their worst desires, but because they're soft-spoken, they don't see themselves as the monsters they are.
Let me see if I can. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Well, I think, you know, it's interesting because, first of all, I didn't find Bear that handsome. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. I wasn't that into him.
Fair.
But I do think that, you know, this, to me, he was a lot like a character like a Norman Bates. You know, he felt like he led this very quiet existence. You know, he was good looking enough, but there was that, you know, that nervous, odd tension with him throughout that to me was very much that like Norman Bates character who, yeah, they come across as this nice guy and they're quiet, but it's always those like quiet ones you have to look out for. So I thought that I thought his performance was really good. To me, he was like a modern day Norman Bates.
You know, and there's something interesting there because the conversation, adding Norman Bates to the conversation is interesting because, you know, while the grandmother isn't actually cast, she's a figure here. He lived with his grandmother. He took care of his grandmother. This film is set in his grandmother's house. There is that sort of maternal figure, the theme that carries through from this to Norman Bates. I think that's spot on.
Although RS,
Well,
I'd like
I'm
to,
also thinking a
go
little
ahead,
bit
RS.
about
Yeah, go ahead.
there a few years ago there was a does anyone remember the incel mass shooter? Like a kid who went on a mass shooting because he couldn't get a girlfriend. And one of the things he and a lot of incels insist is that, it's because I'm not handsome enough, it's because I'm not tall enough. When really it's just the kid was actually pretty good looking. He was just horrible. His vibes were so rancid that he couldn't get a girlfriend despite being wealthy and pretty conventionally attractive. So I think part of the reason why they made Bear cast by a good looking guy is really to drive home the fact that, like, no, it's not anyone else's fault. It's not because you're not good looking enough. It's just your vibes are terrible and you're completely terrible and you probably smell like a grandma.
You know, RS, I'd like to just also try out another sort of theory. By the way, there's a whole thing on Reddit and some other places about whether Bear is actually stinky, whether he smells bad. But to your point, but we did a show, I don't know, a year or two ago about a book based on a book. The author Jessica Crispin joined us. It was called "What Is Wrong with Men: Patriarchy, the Crisis of Masculinity, and How." Of course, Michael Douglas films explain everything. And to me, RS, there's a Michael Douglas thing going on here. I mean, it's even, there's a cat who's prepared as food. It kind of recalls the bunny in the pot in the kitchen in Fatal Attraction. But what's happened here with Bear, with this character, is rather than running into a Sharon Stone in Basic Instinct or a Glenn Close in Fatal Attraction, he's taken a woman who wasn't that way and with his wishing, with this magical toy, made her into one of those. And now he has to live with this or deal with it in some way. And RS, I think that's kind of a pretty radical subversion of that 80s 90s Michael Douglas femme fatale trope. You had the bad luck to fall in love with or get sexually attracted to somebody who's really, really crazy and inappropriate. But this time, oh no, you made that person.
Yeah, it's saying, are you sure you really want this? Because the fantasy is, I want a girl who's totally devoted and blah blah blah. Like, do you really? Because that's going to get old pretty quickly. Having someone with no sense of self. Like, there's the little trend of like trad wives, supposedly women who are kind of trying to make themselves be this ideal male fantasy who's completely submissive and centered on her man. And they do get married, and quite often their men get tired of them really quickly and cheat on him with more independent women, because someone who's just kind of a mindless person there to serve you is pretty boring. There's not a lot going on. It gets old fast, and that also happens in the movie once he actually gets this totally obsessed version of Nikki that he wants. He starts chasing the kind of cool art chick who still has ambitions and still wants something,
and who was chasing him in the first place. Carolyn,
Right.
I'm wondering. I want both you and Mercy to talk about this. But Carolyn, do you think that Curry Barker is in control of this narrative in that particular way? Do you think that Curry Barker's intentions were to be about a man who ultimately puts a young woman in a terrible position because one of the things we discover, we only see it really, I think, twice in the movie, is that the old Nikki can wake up inside that body. And now she's really being forced to have sex with somebody she doesn't want to. She's committing murders. All kinds of horrible things are happening. Do you think Curry Barker gets all of the things that all three of you panelists have been saying, Carolyn?
I definitely think I'm hoping he does. Because if he doesn't, he's just like the luckiest jerk to ever make a good movie, if this is all like kind of accidental and he just sort of stumbled into the depth of this, I'm even more impressed with him in some ways. But, it's interesting because to me, that was the pivotal moment in this movie that really changed it from being kind of this like, just a general horror movie to being something that really enters that psychological realm. When you realize that Nikki is inside there and has to like watch herself be this other version, to me, that was a really compelling and haunting psychological aspect that I don't think there is any way that he had overlooked. And it really, I haven't watched his other stuff. I watched a couple of his like YouTube shorts. I have not watched his first movie that was like a found footage horror thing that he had shot on the cheap. But I'm interested in seeing where he goes next, because I think if this is where his imagination and mind goes and pulls from, I think it's really interesting to have these kind of something like this that has that depth and has that angle of this feminist approach to looking at the torture of a woman.
Mercy Quay, Mercy Quay, you get the last word here.
So, a number of years ago, I sat on an SPJ panel for Women's History Month, and I remember specifically saying something like, if women are the only people who can tell women's stories, then we have a problem, and we're going to continue having a problem. I think the director here got too many things too well on the nose for it to be happenstance or coincidental. Like, for instance, bear, like just his name being Bear, right? Would you rather run into a bear in the woods or a man? And it's like there are just a number of things that are just too well on the nose for it to be stumbled upon. But I also think that there's this I'm reminded of this quote from Jamila Jamil, who said, if women were naturally submissive, we would have submitted already. I think that this film and the portrayal of Nikki fighting back tooth and nail to reclaim her body, right? Like the physical thing that tethers her to this world is a representation of the fact that, like, women are not naturally submissive, no matter how much voodoo or root work you try to spin on them. And, I am really looking forward to what this director does in the future. I think, and I won't say post Me Too, but I will say post Me Too sort of like moment, in the time that we're in, where we saw the Me Too movement name and cancel several high-powered, powerful men. We also, as a downstream effect of that, have a lot of young boys who were coming of age around that time and not really understanding why society was going after canceling, naming men of this kind. And so without that explanation, you have a lot of young men thinking that there's this culture of hatred towards men and not quite understanding why.
All
if
right,
we've got
directors... We got to wrap here. We're going to have no time whatsoever on the other end of this. But the movie's Obsession, I will say, is the 71-year-old man who's not representative of the audience. I found it also very funny. I mean, for everything that we just said, I laughed really hard on certain scenes. But that may say more about me. We'll take a quick break. We'll come back. The panel will make some recommendations. Time for some thank yous. Our technical producer today is Obi-Wan Gina Matruda, the Jedi Master. Jonathan McPants produced this episode of The Nose and pretty much all episodes of The Nose. We're going to go back to our panel. We have a limited amount of time. There's 4 of you, so don't go too long. But Shawn Murray, since you've been sitting on the bench icing your knees, you can go first. What have you got to recommend?
I just have one quick thing. It's a video essay series on YouTube by this user called Comedy Without Errors, called We Need to Talk About Louis. It's a sort of examination and dissection of Louis C.K.'s career as a former fan, kind of reckons with Louis in the wake of his, I guess, confirmed allegations from 2017 and onward, and how Louis never really fully apologized for anything, and it kind of goes in depth on some of the allegations and really exposes how insidious and kind of dark and evil Louis really was, and despite the fact that he was a great comedian, doesn't really forgive him for those stuff. It's incredible. 5-part series on YouTube.
Say the title again.
We Need to Talk About Louis.
All right, that's easy to remember. Mercy Quay, how about you? What are you going to recommend?
So I'll start by recommending everyone follow NASA on Instagram, just because I need to get that one in there to keep my street cred as a space nerd. But also, I've got a film and then I've got a book. It's called The Platform. It's on Netflix. It's a Spanish horror from 2019. If diving into this idea of late stage capitalism, I think it's an excellent piece. Characters go into a prison and sell off a number of their years, and antics ensue. And then I'm also reading Everyone Who Is Gone Is Here, which is really a cataloging of the impacts of the lives of those impacted by more than 100 years of U.S. interference in Central and Latin America. It is not an easy read, and it's deeply dysregulating. So dive into it when you're not, I don't know, looking for something happy.
Okay. R.S. Benedict, what should we read? What else should we read or watch when we're looking for something that will make us happy or unhappy?
I would recommend Studio Q, also known as Misterio. It's a recent restoration by Severin Films of surreal 1970s Mexican telenovela Truman Show mind trip. It's very strange and very wonderful and very interesting.
All right. Say the name again.
It's called Studio Q.
All right. We will check that out. Carolyn Paine, what have you got to recommend?
Yeah, I don't know if this is like a recommendation or like a don't watch it, but Colin, you can thank our friend in common, Wendy, for this one. She got me hooked on a reality show on Netflix, The Ultimatum. Now, I know it has been typically my position here on the panel to like offer up crazy reality TV for people to watch. This one, I'm like on the fence. Like it could be it's a non-recommendation, but it fits the theme of obsession. It is like couples that one is giving the other an ultimatum of like marry or get out, and they are put into this experiment where they are split up and put with other couples. It's really wild. I don't know how I needed to watch all 8 episodes of this and the reunion show, like basically in one sitting, but that happened. But I think it's like there's something as psychologically and horrifically interesting as as obsession. And so it kind of ties in. So if you're looking for reality garbage, there it is.
All right. I will quickly endorse the career of Renate Reinsve, the Norwegian actress who we see in Backrooms. We also saw her in Sentimental Value. She was so great that's a Norwegian movie, Sentimental Value. She was so terrific in that. I think she might have even got an Oscar nomination out of it, that I went back and watched The Worst Person in the World by the same director, and she's the true and full star of a movie about sort of just kind of what it's like to be a woman in your 20s. But she is going to be a huge star. I hope Marvel Cinematic Universe doesn't gobble her up, because she's going to do some amazing work if she's given the chance. So thanks very much to this wonderful nose, to Shawn Murray, to Mercy Quay, to R.S. Benedict, to Carolyn Paine. Yes, I'm being told it was the Best Actress nomination. And we will say goodbye for this week. By the way, I should say this every Friday, but Grayson Hugh wrote the wonderful song that ends our week. So let's hear from Grayson and enjoy your weekend.
It's cozy, like a Cracker Barrel. Yeah, we all be laughing, talking, joking, talking about this and talking about that, and talk about everything as a matter of fact. Oh yeah, talk about Torrington, Vernon, Danbury, Waterbury, Alderberry, Woodbury, hitting on New Britain, Vernon, I already said that one, Avon, Farmington, yeah.